Well, thank you so much for indulging me on this interesting Sunday morning because if you don't know the context of what's happening today, I'm taking a class in seminary about Asian American churches, and one of the things that the professor said was, if you're Asian American, that's how God created you, and so don't try to avoid it, embrace it. And so one of our projects was to infuse your Sunday morning with your heritage, and so you guys are all part of my school project. And in case you're wondering what else is going on, so we have the Sunday children's message. We also have rice balls, nigiri. I don't know how you guys know it, but basically in Japan, there aren't that many potlucks because it's hard to go and bring food because most people walk there, or they ride their bicycles or ride public transportation. And so what they do instead is they bring they make food together at their kitchen, at their church, but we don't have a kitchen, so we're making rice balls together. And there's been so many people at this church who've participated and said, hey, Katsu, want to help? So thank you so much. Everything from what goes in the inside to the way that's presented. And yeah, so thank you so much for those of you who are helping. So another thing we're going to do today that's different than usual is we're going to take communion, but we're going to be using green tea. Do I look at Shohei? Right, okay. So, but for those of you who don't like green tea, we also have grape juice from Mitsuwa, and that's going to be passed out to you during service. And instead of taking bread, we're going to be using senbei. So we're going full out, guys. And by the way, they don't do this in Japan. They don't take communion with green tea. We're just doing that because I thought, hey, how this is one way to be more Japanese American. So you can look forward to that. Okay, so I want to start today. Today's message is going to be more about contextualizing our faith to our culture. And I understand this is my culture. Your culture might be different, and that's totally okay. And I look forward to hearing from you guys what kind of culture you want to see implemented at Westlight, and maybe we'll consider it and see how that might work. So I want to start off with this question, which is this. What image comes to mind when you imagine church, right? And I've talked about this with a lot of people in the past, and some of you are like, when I think about the church, I think about, the first thing I think about is the Bible, which is right here, like the Bible. It's like, oh yeah, I think about like people flipping through pages, like that's weird that Westlight, most people don't bring their Bible because I usually put the Bible on the screen, right? A lot of you guys think of teachings, biblical teachings. Others of you, when you think about the word church, this comes to mind. Like you think of a building, right? It's like usually white picket fences, and there's a church tower and like a steeple, and there's like a bell maybe, pews on the inside. Some of you guys think about building. That's okay. I mean, that's, when we say I'm going to church, you're thinking usually about the building, right? We don't have that here, by the way, because we can't afford to have a nice building. But it's okay. Sometimes the tiles fall from the ceiling, and that's okay with us. Well, until it hits you, then it's not okay. When you think about the word church, some of you think about, if you're old school, you're thinking about like a priest, and why doesn't class dress like this, right? Or you're thinking more like a Catholic or other churches. You might be thinking of a pastor, or you might be thinking about an organist, or you might be thinking about the worship team. Like, oh yeah, there's a group of people who come up and they lead us in singing. By the way, that's a fairly new thing in church history. Do you know what the difference between a mass and a service is? It's not that one is Catholic and the other one is Protestant. A mass, originally, the differentiation was that at a mass, the preacher and the choir and everybody would be facing the same directions that you guys were facing because the cross will be over there. It was like everybody had an audience of one, but now it's like more like there's a stage and there's you guys, right? But there's all these things that you think about when you think about church. And some of those things have evolved over time, and that's okay. Some of you guys think about like a prayer team, but here's the thing, guys. Everything I just listed right now are not necessary to have church. These are things that were added onto this thing called church over time, right? There were no worship leaders in the first century. There was no prayer team. People prayed, but there were no prayer teams. There was no head priest. There was no white building. There was, a lot. They didn't use the Bible back then. The Bible wasn't printed until hundreds of years after the first church was started, right? So a lot of the things that come to mind when you think about the word church is not necessary to have a church. So Earlier, I asked you guys what comes to mind, what images, right? And you're probably thinking, well, that's what I had in my mind, but well, what's supposed to, like, what is Christianity or the church supposed to look like? Like, what does the Bible prescribe for us? What does it say that we're supposed to have? And you will be surprised that the church, well, first of all, church is not a building or a program, it's the people, that's you guys. And for that reason, the church looks different everywhere in the Bible. Everywhere. In the book of Acts is the beginning of the church. It's the birth of the church and how it changed over time. Every chapter you read about a church, it looks different the very next chapter, or sometimes even the very same chapter. So, I'm going to tell you one story in the Bible, in the book of Acts, of how different church looked like in one of the cultures. And I want to show you a map here. The church started over here on this side of the Mediterranean Sea, okay? Our character that we're going to be following today, his name is Paul the Apostle, and he comes from over there, okay? He comes from this place called Antioch, but he was trained down here in Jerusalem, so he understands the Jewish culture, and that's probably the only culture he was familiar with at this point in the story. But God called him to go to this area over here, and as he traveled in this direction, he had to adapt. He had to change some things about Christianity and church so that it would be more accessible to the people around them. Because remember, his number one message that he wanted to share with everybody was that Jesus loved them, okay? And in order to get that message out, he had to change a few things, right? So Paul was used to having like a building, like a temple, because he was a Jew, right? And he realized the further he moved away from that area of the map, there were less and less buildings that represented like places that they could hang out together and talk about Jesus. He grew up with a Bible, they call it the Torah scroll, right? But the further he moved away, the less and less the people there spoke his language, the less and less people knew about this scroll called the Torah, right? Where he came from, there were priests. But the further you walk away from this area, the less and less priests that you find. So when Paul enters a foreign land, what does he do? How does he convey this new way of thinking, this Jesus? How does he do it? So that's what we're going to look at. Today we're going to be looking at this area called Athens, the city right here, Athens, right? That's part of Greece. And so let's read that story right now. While Paul was in Athens, so he just walked in there, he was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. Now, the people of Athens, they're not distressed to see idols, but Paul, because one of the 10 commandments is to not build any idols, he looks around, it's like, oh, city of sinners. Like, oh my gosh, look at that, look at that, look at that. Oh, like, they get the heebie-jeebies, right? That's like, this is something that you want to avoid because as a good Jewish boy growing up, you avoid all those kind of things, right? The reason why the Jews had no idea what God looked like is because they had no statues of him. And now you're surrounded by statues, and not only were they statues, right? If it's a statue of God, that's one thing, but it's not just statues. Here's an image of what these idols look like. They're like in the image of humans. And that's another big no-no for Jews, right? Because they believe that God created man in his image, not the other way around. It's like humans are creating God in the image of humans. Like that's not how it's supposed to go. And not only that, they're naked, right? Like they're like, oh, I can't look. Because remember, that's the culture he comes from. Whereas in the Greek culture, you embrace the body, right? So he's looking around like, oh, this is not right. There's so many things I want to fix because this isn't how we're supposed to worship God. But Paul does something very, very important that I think a lot of missionaries don't. This is what he does. So he reasoned. The word in the Greek here, because this is originally written in Greek, is the word dialegomai, which is where we get the word dialogue. There's two people or more involved. He started talking. He reasoned in the synagogues. These are Jews that are living in Athens with both Jews and God-fearing Greeks. So there are people who aren't Jewish there also, as well as in the marketplace day by day with those who happen to be there. So Paul is basically saying, tell me more about why the world is like this here. Why do you have these statues here? Why? Instead of judging the city that he's in, saying you guys got it all wrong, he wants to understand, why is it the way that it is right now? Are you intentionally trying to offend people like me? Or is this something you consider to be beautiful? So he's like, tell me more. You Jews, you're like me, all right? So tell me, how do you feel about this? And then he talks to people who are like, okay, you are not Jewish, but I would like to know, how do you view all this? And then he goes to the marketplace and says, you grew up here. You guys are locals. First, tell me where the good places to eat are, but the next, tell me, what is it like? Why is it like this? And as he starts to learn, he starts to understand more and more about their culture. And he doesn't hate it as much anymore, right? So Paul is trying to learn their way of life. And then he comes across two groups of people, the Epicureans and the Stoic. They're both philosophers. They began to debate with them on the marketplace. Now, who are these people? Here's a quick overview of who these people are. Epicureans are people who say that God is far away. Like, we believe God exists, but he created this world. He set the timer and he walked away and he went on vacation, right? God is somewhere. We don't know where he is, but he's far away. So that means that we're on our own. And because we're on our own, let's make the best of it. So let's hey, God created plants. Let's figure out how to make trees and fruit and vegetables so that we could eat something, because we're on our own. God gave us these puzzle pieces. It's up to us to assemble it together. It's like IKEA furniture without the instructions. That's basically what this is. There's some Swedish guy with some really long name that I can't pronounce with a J in the middle of some word, right? And we just don't know how to build it, but we're supposed to do something with it. And they make the best of it. And because there's no accountability, you could live your life the way you want to live, right? So that's what these people believe. Now, the Stoics, these people, they believe that God is actually everywhere. That God is in the tree, God is in the river. Let's have a God of the ocean, and God of fertility, and God of this, God of that, goddess of this, goddess of that, right? But so we know that God is around us, but we just don't know where exactly. It's because God is hidden. So it's up to us to find God in everything around us. And because of that, we can harness God for our own benefit. There has to be a way to figure out, like, if there's a God of the ocean, maybe if we sacrifice this to Poseidon, then maybe we'll have smooth sailing for the rest of this trip. See how that works? So we have these two schools of thought that Paul is now encountering at the same time. Now, Paul notices something. These two groups, although they seem very different, like the question they're asking is, we believe God exists, but we just don't know how far he is, right? Is he really close to us or is he far away, right? They also agree that God is not relational because if God wanted himself to be known, then he would be known. But the fact is they don't know exactly where God is, so right. But they both agree that God is around, but they just don't agree on how far or how close this God is. So Paul, learning about this, because remember, he's interviewing all these people, he decides, like, this is what I'm going to do. So here it is. This is what he does. Some of them asked, what is this babbler, Paul, trying to say? Babbler is a derogatory way of saying, like, hey, this guy is just talking nonsense. Others remark, he seems to be advocating foreign gods. They said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. So this is what Paul is saying. He's saying, you guys think God is distant. You guys think God is close. I'm here to tell you that God lived amongst us. He walked with us. And not only that, right? He was willing to die for us. So not only is he discoverable, he's like right here, he walked amongst us, he was also relational. He wanted to know us. And he loved us so much that he was willing to die for us. Well, what happened to him? Oh, here's the thing. He rose from the grave, so he still is with us. Like, this is like groundbreaking for the people in Athens, right? So let's continue. What does Paul say? Oh, they looked to Paul and brought him to a meeting of the Areopagus, which is where the court was. But in those days, the court was basically a bunch of intellectual people who would debate philosophy, so that kind of stuff. They're probably wearing togas. Okay. Where they said to him, may we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting. You are bringing some strange ideas to our ears, and we would like to know what they mean. It was against the rules to have strange teachings. As a matter of fact, Socrates was considered guilty because he brought in some strange teachings. And that's what Paul's being accused of right here. Okay, so Paul's in trouble here. He's like, hey, I have to be bold. I have to share with you guys what I noticed. But he's being accused of bringing in some other foreign teaching. And he's like, yeah, I am bringing some foreign teaching. So Paul, he stood up in front of them. He stood up, next slide, in the meeting of the Areopagus and said, people of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. This is how he starts his statement. He says, I've noticed that you guys worship everything. the rock, the water, the sun, everything, right? You even celebrate war, and you worship victory, right? Like, actually, Athens is named after Athena Nike, which is the goddess of victory. It's like, I see that you have a worship service for everything, right? Not a bad thing, just saying I noticed that about you guys, right? And he says, for as I was walking, next slide, there we go. As I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, to an unknown God. Okay, quick context, unknown God. They had a god or goddess for everything, right? And they would say, hey, today I'm gonna go farming. I worship the god of farming. And I'm gonna have this oxen pull I gotta worship the god of oxens, right? And then I'm gonna plant some seeds. Oh, the worship of seeds. Okay. They were afraid that they might forget to worship one of the gods that they have not identified yet. And to cover that, they had an altar that was dedicated to an unknown God. This is what that looks like. Okay, so they found this in archaeology. Good job, dug this up. Okay, and so as long as they offer something to this, they think that they're appeasing these undiscovered deities out there, right? So Paul comes in and says, hey, I noticed I saw all these gods and goddesses. I saw this one little thing that was dedicated to an unknown God. Like you're, one of the gods that you have not discovered yet, right? He's like, let me tell you about that. So he focuses on this, and he says this. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live by temples built by human hands. He's saying, this God that you have not discovered yet, because, X, we don't know exactly what this is. It's a variable. This God, let me tell you about him. I noticed that you built all these nice looking statues around here. You guys built it in your own image. I'm telling you, the God that you haven't discovered yet is so big and so amazing and so formless that you cannot build with your own hands. As a matter of fact, I noticed that some of the nicest statues are inside this nice building. My God is so big, he can't even fit in this building. He can't fit in any building, right? He says, rather, he himself, wait. And he is not served by human hands as if he needs anything. Like, I notice that you guys give offerings to all these little statues here. Let me tell you, my God doesn't need any of that. As a matter of fact, he's not demanding anything from you guys. He is the one that's actually giving life. He's giving you breath, he's giving you water, he's giving you everything you need to survive. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. So he's giving a totally different way of looking at gods, right? Because up until now, they thought we're supposed to be servants to these gods in the pantheon. But he says, no, my God, no. He wants to serve you. He loves you. He wants to take care of you. And he is generous. And he loves you, that he's willing to lay his life down for you. God, next slide, did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far away from any one of us. He's saying here, you guys don't know if God is near or far. This God that you haven't discovered yet, this God, he wants to be found. And therefore, he came here as a human being, right? He says this, God can be known, which is like, they're like, really? How come he said it? It's like, no, not only that, right? Not only can he be known, he wants to be known. And these guys are like, this is foreign to us. What are you talking about? What do you mean, right? It's like, and they're like, wait a minute. Says who? Paul, you're visiting us. Like, you could be making this stuff up. Like, now at this point, if Paul wanted to prove what he was saying, in his background, in his training, what he would do is he would bust out the scroll and say, right here in Isaiah chapter 5, y'all, right? He could have just done that. But he knows that these people don't use scripture. Right? He could have quoted some famous rabbi, but these people don't know who those rabbis are, right? All the things that we rely on to have church, Paul doesn't have access to because he knows that using any of those things would make no sense to these people, right? Paul could use the Bible, but he's not going to, right? They have no concept of scripture. So Paul right here pulls a little genius move. This is what he does. He quotes something else. For in him we live and move and have our being, which sounds like a Bible verse, but it's not, right? As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. He's quoting not the Bible, which would be like, in most churches in America, it would be like, right? What he's doing here is he's quoting a poet, his name is Epimenides. I'm not even sure if I'm saying it right, but this is where the quote comes from. Epimenides the Cretan. He says, they, the Cretans, fashioned a tomb for you. He's talking about Zeus here. O holy and high one. The Cretans always liars, evil beasts, idle bellies, but you are not dead. You live and abide forever, for in you we live and move and have our being. This is what Epimenides is saying. He's saying, the people from my area, we're trying to kill Zeus. And they even claimed, oh yeah, we killed Zeus, right? And he says, that's absurd. This is what the poet's saying. That's absurd. We didn't kill Zeus. How do we know? Because you and I were still breathing. Because we know that Zeus is the one that gives us breath. And so therefore, if we're still living, that means that Zeus is still alive. That's what this poet is saying. But that is not the theology that the Greeks had back then. So what Paul is saying here is this. One of your poets, Epimenides, he was writing about Zeus, but he wasn't writing about Zeus. He stumbled upon the truth about my God, not about Zeus, in writing this poem. So let me quote that poem to you to let you know that my God is not just the God of the Jews, he's the God of even you guys. That's the argument he's making here, right? He's like, one of your poets stumbled upon this truth, right? Because my God, Jesus, he was killed. They set up a tomb for him. But he's still alive today. And the reason we know that Jesus is still alive today is because you and I are still breathing. We're still alive. We're still having our being, as he would say. Do you see what he's doing here? Paul didn't use the Bible. He used one of their scriptures because Paul contextualized the good news. He's using the culture he's in, and he's using the good stuff of that culture to love on the people in that area. If he moves to another area that's not Athens, he will probably do the same thing. He'll find out what is happening in that culture, what is good about that culture, and he'll use that to convey the message of Jesus. Paul isn't the first person to do this. We know that Jesus did this. The story that we just did with the Kamisama, Luke chapter 10, Jesus tells his disciples not to take with them any money, any purse, any sandals. And what it does is that it forces his disciples to go into a town without anything to give, so that it will force them to be a part of that culture and work with them. And through that, they'll learn more about that culture they're in and befriend the people there. And through their actions, through their being, they're able to love on the people of that area. So this is not original to Paul. This is something Jesus did also. And this tradition continued into the early church. So let me share with you guys, let me introduce you guys to a new character. His name is Pope Gregory the Great. Super Greg. Now, this is about 596 AD. Pope Greg, he sent out this missionary to the Breton Islands, England, right? And at the time, there's no Christians up there. There's no church there. He sent one of his favorite disciples. His name is Augustine up there. And Augustine, he only knows Roman Catholic culture. That's all he knows. That's the only thing he knows. So he goes out there and he builds his church and he doesn't know what to do. So he writes a letter to Pope Greg, and Greg reads it, and he's like, oh, let me respond to this letter, and we have a copy of that right here. He says, talking about Augustine, your brotherhood is familiar with the usage of the Roman Church, since you have very pleasant memories of being raised and nurtured in that usage. It's like, hey, the only thing you know is the Roman Catholic Church culture. That's all you know. So I understand you're lost. How are you supposed to love on the people here? So this is the advice that Pope Gregory the Great gives. But it seems to me that you should carefully select for the English church, which is still new to the faith and developing as a distinct community, whatever can best please Almighty God, whether you discover it in the Roman church or among the Gauls or anywhere else. He says, don't try to take what you learned in church and take it over to this new community. Look there and find anything that's good and use that. And he continues. For customs are not to be revered for their place of origin. Just because it comes from their culture doesn't mean it's evil. Right? If you go to Japan and then you're like, okay, I need to bring in my evangelical ways to Japan. No. Take what's there, like, oh, that looks good, that looks fun. Hey, this is how they should express love. Then let's use that in the way that we express our love for Jesus. Rather, those places are to be respected for the good customs they produce. Respect the culture that you're in. One more. From each individual church, therefore, Choose whatever is holy, whatever is awe-inspiring, whatever is right. Then arrange what you have collected as if in a little bouquet, according to the English disposition, and thus establish them as a custom. Right? What is Pope Gregory saying here? He's saying that there is no best or right way to worship God. Oh, but you go to a church and you're like, this doesn't seem like how we did it. Oh, I need to change the way they do church because this doesn't seem right. Pope Gregory would say, that's because that's all you knew. Your job is to come over to this culture and contextualize. Learn how they best express their love and worship and do it that way. A scholar who studied this, Dr. Russell Yee, this is what he said about this. Gregory, he understood that no single culture has a lock on the right way to worship as Christians, not even the dominant church culture established by Rome. There's no right way to do this, do church. So you come to Westlight and you're like, you guys do things differently, right? Yeah, and that's okay. And you'll go to another church and like, oh, this church doesn't do it like Westlight. That's okay. We have no right to go there and say, you need to do service this way because that's heresy. No, you have no right to say that. Paul used the culture of Athens and used that to worship God. And that's okay. That's preferred. That's actually respectful. You see, we think what did Christianity look like in the place I grew up? And then you judge other churches based on that. No. What we should do is we leave our own culture, we come into their context, learn their culture, and find the best way to worship God through that. The way that we need to understand this is this, that God intentionally placed you in your culture. You know who does this really well is the black church. You go there and you don't even have to look at the color of their skin, the type of music, the way they greet each other. You just know that this is their culture. My professor was talking about how, Asian American culture, we're so quick to say, oh, let's lessen that and let's adopt the white culture. And he says, well, what does it look like for us to embrace our own culture? What does that look like, right? Meaning, God created you to be Asian American or whatever you are, right? What does it look like to embrace that? I'll tell you a few things I noticed. In Asian American cultures, even though you're not blood related, the people who are older than you, you call them auntie or uncle. And it's okay to keep that in the church. That's totally fine. As a matter of fact, in the Bible, Eastern culture, just like ours, they had that familial type of community, and that's okay. Another thing I noticed about Asian American culture is that it's hard for us to say I love you, but we do say I love you through food, right? You guys know what I'm talking about? I went a long time ago, I was invited to a Chinese New Year thing and they kept on feeding me, and I learned if I clear my plate, because Japanese Americans, we think you have to clear the plate to show that, not to be rude, right? Oh, it's delicious, thank you, no more. And they're like, oh, clear plate, here's more food. And so I learned that you're not supposed to eat all your food if you're done, because then they'll stop feeding you. But it's a cultural thing. And so it makes sense for us. I know for a while we had this thing called Food for Finals. The way we show love to the college students at UCLA was to give them food, right? And that's the way we show love, and that's okay. I also know that in most white evangelical church cultures, the way that they worship, the worship songs are designed to emote. But typically, not saying all Asian Americans are like this, we like to be more reserved. We're kind of like worshiping like this, right? But the songs that we sing are designed to raise our hands and all that kind of stuff. That's okay. If you don't feel comfortable raising your hands while worshiping, that's okay. But if you want to, go right ahead, okay? This is what it looks like to embrace the culture that God gave us. Worship God in the culture that God gave you, right? Because every culture should create ways to cultivate its own expressions of worship. We have no right imposing our culture on somebody else. We're supposed to embrace all cultures. Another pope, his name is Pope Alexander VII, this is what he said. There is no greater cause of alienation and hatred than to change the custom of a nation, because that's what Christians were doing. Right? Admire and praise whatever merits praise. I love that. Don't go around changing the way that people worship, because they have their way of worshiping God. Now, if there's something that's really bad in it, if there's abuse involved, then yes, call that out. But whatever is good and whatever is pure, whatever is praiseworthy, if that's how they want to worship God, embrace it. So the question you might be thinking is this. So how do we create our own method of worship? How do we do that? I don't know, but I could tell you the first step. Because when I look at what Jesus was doing, when I look at what Paul was doing, when I look at what the church, in church history, how we did it, this is what we all have in common. Every time somebody entered into a new culture, they didn't come here with Jesus in their pocket saying, let me introduce to you Jesus Christ. And this is what he did for you. No. In every situation, what we noticed is they always assumed that God was already there. God is here. I'm just here to point it out to you. Paul shows up in Athens and he doesn't say, let me introduce you something that you don't know about. What he says is, you already knew about him, you just didn't know who he was. Look, your poets, they stumbled upon this truth, so let me just put words and stories around what you already know. And what it does is that it makes us more humble. It helps us to research the culture more, right? We come into a situation and say, hey, I know we don't see things eye to eye, but let me see if we could find, oh, hey, you know the way how in your culture you do this? Well, that's exactly what Jesus is like. The assumption is that God already exists and God is already here even before I showed up here. And when you have that attitude, then you can start looking into, well, how do we create a culture around this? A church culture around that? Okay, so like I said earlier, today, we're going to do this, we're going to put this into practice today through the Japanese tea ceremony. Now, what does that mean? Now, for those of you who don't know what that is, here is a picture that's totally staged. I know this is not, it doesn't look that nice usually. The Japanese tea ceremony is a ritual that lasts anywhere from 2 to 4 hours. We're not going to do that, don't worry. Okay, now why is this important to us today? Let me give you a little history. Do you guys know who this is? Next picture. Alan, do you know who this is? Where's Alan? Alan, do you know who this is? His name is Oda. Yes, Nobunaga Oda, yes. He's a warlord of Japan. The reason he was a really successful warlord is because he was the first warlord to open up the borders so there could be more trade. Japan was isolated for a long time before and after this guy. Because he opened up for trade, he was the first to use guns. He used guns in war, and that's how he made it to the very top. And because he was so fascinated by Western culture, he was actually one of the first people where people were like, what are you wearing? It's like, oh, this is Western clothes. These are called pants. He was seen walking around town wearing pants. He loved architecture. He built this castle called the Azuchi Castle, which was based off of cathedrals, the Western cathedrals. He loved Western culture. And when he opened up trade, he also allowed missionaries to come in. And these missionaries were so effective that his wife was actually considered to be Catholic. So, he loved this stuff. They built seminaries and they built churches around the time he ruled Japan. Now, one more character. His name is Sennorikyu. He was the guy that was in charge of the tea ceremony. Tea ceremony came from China, and it was brought to Japan about 400 years before this guy was around. And Sennorikyu was the one that was making sure that the ritual was in place. But he was also, his personality was that he didn't like things that were old, so he was always trying to update it. And now his wife hung out with Nobunaga Oda's wife also, and so she was a Christian also. So, seeing that his wife was Christian, he's like, I know how to make this new. I'm going to take some of Southern Zen Buddhism and take some of the mass Catholic Church ritual and bunch it together, and I'm going to create something called the tea ceremony. And the tea ceremony, if you look at it today, you look at all the things you have to do, it almost mimics exactly the order of service for a mass, a Catholic mass. And he would build these buildings. This is still around. This is in Kyoto. He built a building where it's really small. It's about the size of, I'm going to say maybe 4 of those pianos put together. This is really small. And the entrance is really small. You have to enter through here, okay? Because you have to leave your sword and everything out. And so you come in humbly as you crawl in. Even the richest people will have to crawl in, right? And they would go through the ceremony step by step. That's why it's so long. But just to be clear, this is not a Christian ceremony. It's not a ritual that was Catholic. He just took some elements of both and he put it together and created a Japanese ritual. Now, After Nobunaga passed away or was murdered, I think he was murdered, there was a successor. His successor's name was Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and he didn't like the idea of trade. So he basically cut it off and said no more. And after he died, we had Ieyasu, that was the guy after that, and he didn't just cut everybody off. He said basically like, no, we're going to persecute the people who are living out the Western life here in America, here in Japan. So what he did was he started persecuting Christians because they consider that to be a Western religion that's in the midst of their Eastern ways. And so these Christians who were Japanese, they started feeling like, well, how are we supposed to practice our faith? We have to do it in secret. So these people, they started calling themselves the Kakure Kiristan, which means hidden Christians. And so they would try to have like service in secret. They would have all these, right? And they were like, well, how are we supposed to continue our faith if we're going to be persecuted for our faith? And one of them was like, hey, have you noticed that the Mass is really similar to the tea ceremony? What if we did it like we were doing the tea ceremony, but in our hearts we were actually taking Mass? So they were contextualizing their faith to the culture that they were in. So if you look at this picture again, you'll see that it's mostly rice paper, here, here, here. And if they take Mass at night, you can see their silhouettes. And there'll be guards walking around wondering like, what are these, are those Christians in there? I smell Christians, right? But all they will see are silhouettes of people doing the tea ceremony. So they'll be like, oh, they're just doing tea ceremony. But in secret, they were actually participating in Mass, okay? So, here's a quote from one of the historians. He's actually a biblical scholar, Isaac Kikawada. He says this, as a systematic persecution of Christians by the successors of Nobunaga began, the tea ceremony became instrumental for the underground Christians. These Kakure Kiristan used it as either a substitute for the Mass or the Mass itself in disguise. This is how they survived, by contextualizing their faith, okay? This is more like a historian, Karen Anderson said this, if an observer wandering through the 17th century Japanese garden came upon a tea ceremony being offered in a simple tea house, he would see the events in silhouette through the rice paper walls. I was just talking about this. Let's keep going. Because the actions are so similar, he would not be able to distinguish it from the consecration at a Mass. Masses were secretly offered in tea houses. Partly because of this, the Catholic faith in Japan survived underground for the next 200 years. Now, the population of Christian in Japan is under 1%. It's really small in Japan. But the fact that that's even there is because of them contextualizing their faith, contextualizing church, the culture that was around them. And that's good. Communion doesn't have to use leavened bread as it was originally done 2,000 years ago in Israel. Like, you guys know, if you've been coming here, you guys know, Westlight, we do not use unleavened bread. We use King's Hawaiian bread, baby, because that's, right? Because that's how we contextualize. When we thought, what represents the goodness of Jesus' body? Oh, King's Hawaiian bread, baby, right? Like, right? And we don't use wine because we're underage people here, and some people, we wrestle with alcoholism. So we're like, you know what we should do? We should have grape juice. And that's okay too. We're contextualizing, guys. We've been contextualizing this whole time and you didn't even know it, right? So we use what's available to us, what seems fitting to us, right? Because we believe that God is big enough to fit any culture. So what we're going to do right now is I'm going to ask Paul. Where's Paul? There you are. Paul, we have some communion elements here, and by communion elements, we're talking about this green tea that I was drinking earlier, right? Oh yeah, please, yeah. And you guys can stay seated. We're gonna pass it out to you guys because we're running short on time. Yeah. So what you're gonna have senbei, okay? And you're also gonna have green tea. And if you prefer the grape juice, just ask them and they'll give you the grape juice. We have a limited amount of grape juice, by the way. Yeah, so if you could just pass it down the aisles. While they're doing this, I want you to think about this. How would you contextualize your faith in your household, at your workplace, at your school? What does that look like to you? With the understanding of this, that God was there even before you were there. How do you recognize Jesus at your school? How is God already at work at your workplace, in your family? how would you live out your faith in the context that you find yourself in? So while we contemplate these things, can we unmute? Alexa, can we unmute? Yeah. This is her first day doing this. She's doing a great job. Good job. Yeah. And also electric. Yeah, thank you. So while they play this beautiful music, and Mitchell, can we turn off the lights? Thank you. Let's contemplate what Jesus has done for us. And what does that look like in the context that you find yourself in today? Okay, let's close our eyes and let's contemplate.